Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping day 11 of the second round of the NHL playoffs. And all four second round series after Game 4 were 3-1 in score. Only the Tampa Bay Lightning would actually manage to close out their series in 5 games against the Boston Bruins. All of the other second round series that were 3-1 have now gone to a Game 7, and that includes 2 Game 6s tonight that ended up going in the favor of the trailing team. The first one was Islanders versus Flyers, a pretty back and forth game, at least on the scoreboard. It starts off with 2 straight Flyers goals. That would be Hayes and then Van Riemsdyk getting it, but then it would be Derek Brassard cutting into the lead and making it 2-1. Early in the second period, Matt Martin would score the goal to tie it up, and I thought this was going to be a big shift of momentum because not only is this the goal that ties the game for the Islanders, but Alain Vigneault has a failed goaltender interference challenge, emphasis on the failed part of that, and that leads to an Islanders power play, which leads to an Anders Lee goal to make it 3-2 Islanders. But instead, the Flyers respond quite well. They get the game-tying goal from Raffl, and it's the Islanders again, this time late in the second period with Barzal to take back the lead 4-3. And again, I thought at this point, okay, it's a late period goal. These are killer for momentum. The Islanders are going to control the rest of this game, but not the case once more. The Flyers get the tying goal once more. It's Lawton tying it at 4, and we head to overtime. And of course, we know how good the Philadelphia Flyers have been in overtime during this second round series with the Islanders, and they are once again the team to come out on top. It's Ivan Provorov's second overtime game winner of the series to take it 5-4 and to force that Game 7. Good news for the Philadelphia Flyers. It has to be Carter Hart in nets. He was certainly the MVP for the Flyers during this game. Number 1 star, absolutely. A very good game from him. Yes, he lets in 4 goals, so it wasn't like otherworldly, but it definitely was a superstar performance from Carter Hart. He had been struggling at times throughout this series, definitely, but he comes up big here in Game 6. The Flyers offense also potting a lot of goals, helping him out in that situation. And so in the end, I guess you could say a bit of a team effort, but Hart definitely there at the top. The bad news for the Flyers is the upward trend of their play did not really come to be here in this Game 6. In Game 4, it was a pretty good game for the Flyers. They ended up losing it, unfortunately, but in Game 5, another solid game from the Flyers, and they took it in overtime. And I was half expecting the Flyers to actually come out quite strong here in Game 6, but that just didn't really end up being the case. While they got the offense, in part thanks to some really opportunistic scoring and some poor goaltending on the other side, the fact of the matter is the Islanders for most of this game were sort of just skating circles around this Flyers team. And as I said, they really had no business being in this one if not for poor goaltending on the Islanders side and for great goaltending on their side from Hart. So moving into that Game 7, you probably won't have a situation like this occur. If you give up 4 goals to the Islanders, there's about a 99% chance you're going to lose that game. The fact that they managed to score 5 here is very impressive, but almost certainly won't happen again. So this is something the Flyers are going to have to clean up if they want to win that all-deciding Game 7. And the fact that their 3 victories in this series have all come in overtime is also not really a recipe for success. We'll see if they can play a much cleaner game in Game 7, the all-deciding one. Flyers could move on to the third round. On the Islanders side, the good news has to be is that they really did come back here in this game. They played exceptionally well, not exceptionally well, but they played quite well in this one. We have already seen after losses in these playoffs for the Islanders, the following game, they always come back and they always take control of it. After their loss against the Panthers, they did it in Game 4 and closed out the series. After their loss against the Capitals, they came back in Game 5 and closed the series. After Game 2 loss against the Flyers, they came back and won that Game 3. And so I suspected that after this Game 5 loss, they'd come back, play well in Game 6 and close it out, but they did the first couple of things. They played well, but they couldn't actually secure the victory. So it's good that they managed to play at this level, and as I said, if the Flyers don't show up better in this Game 7, the Islanders could very well be set to take Game 7 anyway, but it is a bit of a worry, and that brings us to the bad news for the Islanders. It has to be Semyon Varlamov. I mentioned the bad goaltending on the Islanders side twice already when I was talking about the Flyers, and Varlamov is just quite bad throughout this game. A couple of these goals were very weak, and he was already kind of bad in Game 5, and this now opens up the situation of what happens in Game 7. Barry Trotz now put in a not literal, but definitely an impossible position of which goaltender to start in Game 7. Do they stick with Varlamov, who has been the starter throughout the majority of these playoffs, or do they go with Greiss, who hasn't hasn't played much, but in the game that he had played, he was very good in that game 4. And in relief of Varlamov back in game 2, he was also very good. It was a situation where Trotz probably should have gone with Greiss in tonight's game, because if you go with Greiss in tonight's game, then if it doesn't work out, okay, you go back with Varlamov, you go back with your starter for game 7, and if it does work out, well, then you win the series and everything is perfectly fine. But tonight, whether or not the Trotz goes with Varlamov or Greiss, he's going to get the blame in this situation if the Islanders do in fact lose. If they lose with Varlamov in nets, it's a question of why did you start the same goalie who was already bad in the 2 previous games again for a third straight game. If they go with Greiss and he loses, then it's the question of why didn't you stick with the starter that got you to this position. So definitely don't envy the position Trotz is in, having to decide between these 2 goaltenders. If I had to make the decision, I would probably go with Greiss just because of how poor Varlamov has looked in these past couple of games, and the fact that an Islanders team scored 4 goals and didn't win the game is sort of speaks volumes about how poor Varlamov was. So I would go with Greiss, but again, this is a tough choice here for Trotz. Don't envy the position. The next game of the day was Canucks versus Golden Knights, and the Canucks also managed to stave off elimination and force the Game 7 with a 4-0 win over the Golden Knights. They get goal from Virtanen, then from Miller, then from Quinn Hughes. Eventually, Horvat would add the empty netter, and it's just a 4-0 victory for the Canucks. And the good news for them, like was the good news for the Flyers, it's Thatcher Demko. And for the Flyers, I mentioned that Carter Hart was not otherworldly. He was very good in that game and definitely the MVP for the Islanders. Let's scratch that for Demko. Demko indeed was otherworldly in this game, pulling off his first career playoff shutout in just his second career playoff start. A spectacular game from Thatcher Demko. Basically the only reason that the Canucks actually end up winning this game. The Golden Knights were all over them, but Demko standing tall, having now only let in 1 goal through these past couple of games. I didn't think it was possible, but he somehow actually performed better than Markstrom has. Obviously Markstrom has the larger sample size and Demko only has a couple of games here, but still, it's been extremely impressive from Thatcher Demko. I thought the Canucks were done for when Markstrom went down with that injury, but the fact that Demko has really stepped up in these past couple of games is huge and could potentially lead the Canucks into the conference final in the Western Conference. But that does, of course, bring us to the bad news. While the series is tied at 3 in terms of how the teams have actually looked in each game, the Golden Knights have outplayed the Canucks in every single one of these games. Now, in the end, that technically doesn't matter. In Game 7, I'm sure the Canucks will be fine getting a single shot on goal to the Golden Knights, 100 shots on goal, as long as they actually get the 1-0 victory in a situation like that. But still, let's say if I were a betting man, the money has to be on the Golden Knights. It's possible Demko remains at this otherworldly level and continues to just stifle everything the Golden Knights throw at them. But if there's even a hint of fall off here from Thatcher Demko, I just don't really see how the Canucks can actually take this Game 7. He needs to be stellar, and these Canucks forwards also need to get these quick opportunistic goals like they managed to do here, this Virtanen wraparound and the likes like that. So it's a situation where the Canucks have not looked very good, but it's the playoffs. It doesn't matter how bad you look. If you're getting the W, that's the only stat that really matters in the end. And the fact that they're in Game 7 and they have the chance to close it out is quite impressive nonetheless. On the Golden Knights side, the good news is really what the same thing was for the bad news for the Canucks. The Golden Knights have looked very, very good in every single one of these games. They've been in it in every single one of these games. And if you were just watching sort of the box score and you weren't actually watching the actual score, you were just watching the shots and things like that, you'd probably have suspected the Golden Knights to have won the majority of these games in this series, even if that doesn't end up being the case. So the play is there. They have 1 foot in the door, but they just can't seem to cross that line and actually finish off this Canucks team. And I don't know if this is a problem with the Golden Knights as a whole. It's important to recall just last season they were up 3-1 against the San Jose Sharks in the first round, and they ended up losing that series 4-3. And after that disastrous Game 7 where they gave up 4 straight goals on a major power play and eventually lost the game in overtime, it's funny because the coach who actually did that to them was DeBoer, and he now coaches Vegas, and the Vegas Golden Knights are now on the brink of losing another series after having led 3-1. But I wonder if this is some sort of Vegas trend. But that also brings us to the goaltending side. Robin Lehner here for the Golden Knights. He hasn't been terrible, like let's say Varlamov has been for the Islanders on the other side there. However, Lehner has been sort of just average, and average just has not been good enough when you're comparing yourself to Thatcher Demko on the other side. He's been getting severely outplayed, and that of course does beg the question whether or not Marc-Andre Fleury, who has been this Vegas Golden Knights goaltender for most of their existence in the NHL, whether or not he actually gets the start and is the one they put their trust into to try and close out this series. It should be very important to mention here, very, very important, that this Game 7 is actually scheduled to happen tomorrow. It seems as though the NHL couldn't care less about this competitive integrity, just judging by the fact of how the draft lottery went this year. So they decided to schedule a Game 7 literally the day after a Game 6. And so this does make the decision for the Golden Knights maybe slightly easier. We've already seen a back-to-back in this series, and Fleury did in fact get the second half of said back-to-back at the time and looked decent in that game. And so it's possible he gets Game 7 here because of that, but it is the all-deciding Game 7, and so going with Robin Lehner for a second straight game is also not out of the question. On the Canucks side, it should be mentioned Demko will almost certainly get the start tomorrow, and that could be difficult. He faced a lot of shots. He got pelted with rubber in this one, and the fact that he has to play once again tomorrow, very, very soon after, it's going to be tough here for him. But that will do it for this recap. In terms of predictions, both of these series I thought would end in 6 games on the Islanders and Golden Knights side, but I end up getting both of those wrong. Both series will end up going to Game 7, and so I won't have any perfect predictions in the second round, but the Islanders and Golden Knights certainly still have as good a chance as any to win their respective series. Class dismissed.